The western horizon bled red as the sun dragged itself down behind the ridges, leaving the sky torn between fire and ash. Heat still trembled over the plains, the kind that clung to skin like punishment, the kind that made even silence sweat. Hawk circled high above, its shadow gliding over brittle grass and thorn. Below, a lone rider moved slowly, his silhouette stretched long against the dying light. His shoulders were bent like old beams under too much weight, his face carved deep with lines of sun and sorrow. The reins in his hands were worn smooth, just like the calluses on his palms, just like the soul he carried. He rode not with purpose but with habit, into town for supplies, into town for company he would not seek. His eyes, whiskey dark, seemed always half closed, as if even daylight hurt to look at. Behind him, his ranch sat empty, a cabin with shutters crooked and wood gray as bone. Some said he lived with ghosts, others said he lived with nothing at all. Both were true. By the time his boots struck the dirt street of town, the sky had gone purple, lanterns beginning to spit light in doorways. The saloon clattered with laughter and lies, the blacksmith's hammer still echoing somewhere down the lane. Life went on, hard and hungry. But life had not gone kindly to Mara. At the far end of the street, a scene unfolded with the cruel rawness of the frontier. A woman, young but already weathered, was sprawled in the dirt, her breath catching in broken sobs. Her dress was torn, streaked with dust and blood. 3 small girls clung to her, each no more than a sparrow in a storm, their cries thin and hopeless. Towering over her was a man, thick with whiskey and rage. Her husband. His fists were still clenched, knuckles raw from striking, spit shining in the corner of his beard. "You give me nothing," he bellowed, his voice cracking the stillness. 3 girls, 3 curses. Where's the son? Where's the man I asked God for? He kicked her once more, and she folded tighter, a ragdoll beneath his boots. Neighbors watched. From porches, from doorways, men who traded cattle, women who carried water, all silent. They turned their eyes as if dust had blown in them, as if cruelty were nothing but wind passing through. The children sobbed louder. Their hands clawed at their mother's dress, their little voices calling, "Mama! Mama!" until even the coyotes in the distance seemed to pause. Elias reined in his horse. He did not speak, did not move closer. His shadow fell across the scene, and the husband caught it first. His head turned, face flushed red, eyes narrowing. "What are you staring at, Granger?" he spat, half smiling with spite. "This ain't your affair." Elias said nothing. His silence pressed against the man heavier than any threat. He swung down from his saddle, boots striking dust. The sound was sharp in the air, like a gavel, like judgment. The man's sneer faltered. For a heartbeat, fear flickered in his eyes, but only for a heartbeat. Then he spat in the dirt and turned his back, dragging himself toward the saloon, muttering curses into the night. The woman stayed where she was, crumpled, her cheek pressed to the ground. Her daughters rocked against her, tiny hands stroking. Her hair as if they could stitch her whole again. Elias stood over them, hat shadowing his eyes. He didn't reach for her, didn't offer words that would cheapen the weight of what he saw. The air between them was heavy, dust, blood, bruises, silence. He knelt at last, one knee sinking into the dirt. His gaze was steady, unreadable. The girls stared up at him, wide-eyed, faces streaked with tears and grime. Mara lifted her head, slow and painful. Her lip was split, her eyes swollen near shut. She looked at him not with hope, but with the dull resignation of a creature who had been beaten too many times to expect rescue. Still, she held his gaze. For 1 breath. 2. And Elias felt something stir, anger, sorrow, something he thought long buried with his own past. The lanterns flickered. The street hummed low with gossip behind windows. And in that charged stillness, Elias knew. The story of the night had been carved into the dust. Dawn crept slow over the town, bleeding pale gold across the rooftops. The saloon still breathed smoke from the night before, shutters rattling with drunken snores inside. Somewhere beyond the stables, coyotes wailed their last cries before slinking back to the hills. The air smelled of whiskey gone sour, of dust settling on sins that never slept. And in the middle of it all, she lay, slumped against a post like discarded cloth, her face swollen, her dress stained with the marks of fists and boots. Her daughters, huddled close, their thin bodies trembling in the early chill. They looked like 3 sparrows left in the road after the storm, waiting for wheels to crush them. Her husband stepped out of the saloon, eyes red, shirt half-buttoned, a bottle swinging. From his hand, his boots dragged, but his voice still had venom. "Get up," he slurred, tipping the bottle toward her. "Can't even give me a son, and now you sit there making me look weak." He spat. "Maybe I'll send you downriver. Let the river—" "Folk take you and your cursed girls. Better than starving on my land." Mara tried to rise, her arms shaking under her own weight, but her body folded again. Her daughters pressed tighter against her, whispering, "Mama, don't." From the far end of the street came the sound of boots. Measured, heavy, deliberate. Elias Granger emerged from the shadows between the mercantile and the stable. Hat low, coat brushing the dust, his figure cut clean against the rising sun. Each step struck the earth like a verdict, echoing in the brittle silence. The husband squinted, then laughed, a broken bark. "Granger, what's this? Come to watch me clean house?" He staggered forward, bottle raised like a weapon. "Ain't no business of yours." Elias stopped just a few paces away. His eyes held the man, calm as still water but deep as a canyon. He didn't speak yet. The silence pressed harder than any words, filling the street until the bottle in the husband's hand seemed to tremble. Finally, Elias's voice came, low, steady, carrying like thunder before the storm. "You're coming." With me, the words weren't aimed at the husband. They were for Mara. The man barked a laugh, louder now, desperate. "You hear that, woman? He wants my scraps, my broken thing." His grin twisted. "You taking her, Granger? You taking her and them brats? That's all you're good for, living with ghosts and begging for other men's leftovers." The girls clung tighter to their mother, eyes darting between the 2 men. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Elias didn't flinch. His hand hovered near his holster but never touched it. He didn't need to. His presence was a blade, sharper than any drawn steel. His silence stretched, taut as a bowstring, daring. The drunk to snap it. The husband's grin faltered. His chest heaved with shallow bravado, the bottle shaking in his grip. At last he spat into the dirt, muttered something too low to matter, and stumbled back toward the saloon. The door slammed behind him, rattling on its hinges. The street went still. Elias turned to Mara. She looked up at him through one swollen eye, her lips split, blood dried on her cheek. She seemed carved of both ash and iron, fragile, yet unbroken. He extended a hand. For a long moment she didn't move. The girls whimpered softly, as if afraid the gesture itself might bring another blow. Then, with a trembling breath, Mara lifted her hand and placed it in his. Rough palm to rough palm, 2 broken edges meeting. Elias pulled her gently to her feet. Her legs quivered, but she stood. Her daughters rose too, each clutching the hem of her dress, their eyes wide as prairie skies. Without another word, Elias led them to his horse. He lifted Mara first, steadying her as she settled behind the saddle. Then one by one he lifted the girls, their tiny hands gripping leather with frightened trust. He mounted last, the weight of 4 souls carried on one weary beast. The horse started forward, hooves drumming soft against the dirt. The town watched from behind curtains, but no one stepped out. No one dared to speak. Dust curled in their wake as they left the street, heading into the open land where the horizon stretched endless and uncertain. They rode through silence. The desert lay before them, painted gold and gray by the rising sun. Sagebrush whispered. In the wind, and far off, a hawk circled against the sky. Mara held to Elias's back, her breath uneven, her body stiff with fear. For a long time she said nothing. Then at last, her voice came, barely more than a whisper against the wind. "Why? The question hung fragile, almost lost in the hoofbeats. Elias didn't answer right away. The silence stretched, heavy as the land itself. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but certain. Because no one else did. The words lingered in the dawn air, a vow etched deeper than stone, as the four of them disappeared into the desert's vast embrace. The desert stretched endless, swallowing the horizon in heat and silence. Hours passed in the saddle, the girls drifting into uneasy sleep against their mother, Mara swaying but holding firm. Elias rode with the weight of them all, his back straight, his eyes fixed ahead, as if the land itself might try to take them back. At last, the shape of a ranch emerged from the wavering air, timbers gray with years, a fence half collapsed, a windmill creaking like an old man's bones. It sat alone on the prairie. No neighbor for miles, nothing but barbed wire, brush, and sky. Elias reined the horse in by the gate. The hinges groaned when he pushed it open, the sound sharp in the stillness. He led them inside, across ground, beaten hard by hooves long gone. The house loomed small but steady, its porch sagging, shutters leaning, a place held together by will more than wood. The girls slid down first, eyes wide, clinging to one another. Their laughter, thin and nervous, fluttered like bells in a graveyard as they darted toward the fence, testing the strange new world with cautious steps. Mara followed, her body stiff with bruises, her breath catching as her boots touched the dust of this foreign ground. She looked at the porch, at the door darkened by shadows, and felt the heaviness in the air. A heaviness not of fear, but of memory. Elias tied the reins, then stood a long moment, looking at the house as if it judged him too. His silence was a man's prayer, unspoken, unanswered. Inside, the cabin smelled of old firewood, of smoke long seeped into timber. The floor creaked. The walls carried scars of years gone. A single chair sat by the hearth, its edges worn smooth by the weight of one man too many nights alone. On the mantel rested a small wooden carving, weathered by fingers, shaped into something like a bird. Mara's eyes found it, lingered, then turned toward the window where she saw it. Far beyond the fence line, a lone oak tree standing against the horizon. Its branches reached wide, though half were bare. The earth beneath it was darker than the rest. Disturbed once, long ago, Elias's voice came, low, almost a whisper. Fever took him. Wife and boy, buried under that oak. Mara said nothing. She only let the silence hold between them, heavy as stone. The girls pressed their faces to the window, unknowing, whispering about the tree as if it were a giant watching them. Through the day, Elias moved with habit. He carried water, stacked wood, checked the fences. He buried his grief in motion. Every task a wall built against the past. Mara watched him from the porch, her daughters wandering the yard with hesitant steps. Their laughter returned, brighter now, but still frail, like new grass fighting through dry earth. When the sun dipped low, painting the land in copper and shadow, Mara sat by the porch rail, her hands folded in her lap. Elias joined her, lowering himself onto the step with the slowness of a man twice his age. The silence stretched long before Mara broke it. "Why carry others' burdens?" she asked softly, her voice carrying the rasp of both pain and courage, "when yours is heavier than most?" Elias kept his gaze on the oak tree, its silhouette black against the setting fire of the sky. For a long while, he didn't answer. Then, steady and low, he said, "Because carrying mine alone near killed me." The words settled in the dusk like an oath, quiet and unshakable. Mara felt them strike deep, like a nail driven into her own wounds. She turned her face, not to hide, but to breathe them in. The girls ran circles in the yard, their voices rising against the coyotes starting to cry in the distance. Elias watched them with an unreadable look, half guarded, half aching. Mara followed his gaze and saw in his silence not just grief, but longing. The shadow of a man who once knew family, once knew warmth, and lost both to the cold hand of fate. When the last light bled from the horizon, Mara rose. She walked to the porch rail, and looked out at the oak tree, standing solemn in the half-dark. Her breath trembled as she stared, as if she felt the same ache rooted in its soil, the same loss bound in its bark. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of dust and sage. She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't feel entirely alone in her suffering. Two broken people stood bound in silence, their wounds different, but the ache the same. The night settled around the house of ghosts. The prairie carried whispers faster than the wind. By week's end, every corner of town hummed with it. Elias Granger had stolen another man's wife. Men muttered over whiskey glasses. Women passed word between laundry lines. The husband, bloated with drink and bitterness, fanned the fire himself. He told anyone who'd listen that Mara was his property, that her daughters carried his blood, and that Granger would pay for harboring another man's sin. By dusk, the rumor had become law in the mouths of cowards. By night, it carried steel. The moon hung sharp and white above the ranch, spilling light over fences and dry brush. Inside, Mara tucked her daughters into quilts Elias had left untouched for years, their small breaths softening the heavy silence. She listened for coyotes, for wind, for anything that wasn't fear clawing at her ribs. Then she heard it. Hooves. Slow, deliberate, circling. The creak of saddles, metal clicking against metal. She froze. Her girls stirred, sensing the change in their mother's breath. Outside, lantern light bobbed through the dark. Two figures rode up to the gate, their horses snorting in the cool night air. One carried a rifle strapped loose. The other twirled a silver coin between his fingers, its glint catching firelight. Both wore the swagger of men paid to end things. "Granger," one called, voice sharp and mocking. "Word is you're keeping what ain't yours. Town says you got a woman inside, belongs elsewhere." The second one spat into the dust. "Hand her over. Easier that way." Elias stepped from the shadows of the porch, boots sinking steady into dirt. His hat brim shadowed. His eyes, but the set of his shoulders told everything. He stopped at the gate, hands at his sides, no weapon drawn. The bounty men smirked at his silence. "She ain't yours," the taller one pressed, voice oily. "You're keeping another man's wife like she's cattle. World don't look kindly on thieves, Granger." Elias lifted his head slightly. The lamplight caught the scars along his jaw, the depth in his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was low, measured, almost too quiet. "She don't belong to any man." The words landed heavy. The shorter hunter chuckled, though his hand hovered, near his holster. "World don't work that way," he sneered. "Woman's property. Man owns what he breeds." From the cabin doorway, Mara clutched the frame, her daughters behind her, wide-eyed and silent. Her chest heaved with fear, yet her eyes locked on Elias. The taller one leaned forward in his saddle. "Last chance, Granger. Step aside. Hand her over." The silence that followed was taut as wire. Elias didn't move. His stillness itself was a blade, and then the wire snapped. The shorter one's hand went for his pistol. Elias was faster. Steel cleared leather, the shot cracking like thunder over the land. The man toppled backward, his coin scattering into the dirt, face gone slack in death before he hit the ground. The taller one roared, firing wild. Elias dropped low, rolled, came up with dust in his teeth and fury in his chest. His shot ripped. The lantern from the rider's hand, glass exploding, flames spilling across the dirt. The horse screamed, rearing, throwing the man down hard. They clashed in the dust, fists, boots, steel. The bounty man swung with desperation, blade flashing in firelight. Elias caught the strike with his forearm, blood spilling, and answered with a savage blow to the jaw. They fell into the dirt, rolling, choking on smoke and grit. Coyotes howled from the ridge, their cries echoing the chaos. Mara's daughters clung tighter, their small voices crying out. Mara herself pressed a hand to her mouth, trembling as she watched the man who had pulled her from the dirt now bleed into it. At last Elias pinned the hunter, his breath ragged, his fist raised high. For a moment, he looked like death itself. Then, instead of the killing blow, he slammed the man's face into the ground, leaving him broken, but breathing. Silence crashed over the yard. Smoke drifted from the shattered lantern. The hunter groaned. In the dirt, too beaten to rise, Elias staggered to his feet, chest heaving, blood dripping from his arm. He didn't look at the men again. His eyes turned instead to the porch, to Mara. From the doorway she whispered almost to herself, "He fights like a man who's already lost everything." Her voice cracked, heavy with awe and sorrow. For the first time since the night she was beaten in town, her fear of men trembled, shaken loose by what she saw in him. The bounty men crawled away before dawn, leaving their blood in the dirt, leaving the silence heavier than when they came. Inside, Elias sat by the fire, his shirt torn, his arm wrapped in cloth. Mara knelt beside him, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest. She cleaned his wounds in silence, the crackle of flames their only witness. Their eyes met once, briefly, not as man and woman, not yet, but as two who knew what it meant to bleed for something worth saving. The fire glowed, warm against the night, and in its light their bond deepened, unspoken, fragile, but real. The days at the ranch stretched long, marked not by hours but by silence. The girls laughed more now, chasing each other through dust and brittle grass. Yet their laughter was fragile, as if a gust of wind might snuff it out. Mara smiled at them when they weren't looking, but when her gaze slipped toward the horizon, her face sank heavy again. At night, when the coyotes sang, the guilt came back. She would sit on the porch after the girls had fallen asleep, her hands wrapped around her knees, staring out at the vast emptiness. Was she a burden? Was Elias paying a price too steep for the company of a broken woman and her 3 children? Every sound of horse hooves in the distance, every whisper of rumor carried on the wind, told her danger still lingered. Elias worked as he always had, fixing fences, mending tools, riding, the perimeter of land that seemed more graveyard than homestead. He did not accuse. His quiet presence told her more than words ever could, yet her shame gnawed all the same. One evening, the sky burned orange as the sun dropped low, the wind stirring smoke from the chimney. Mara tended the fire, feeding it thin sticks, her daughters, asleep in a heap of quilts behind her. Elias sat across from her, his face carved by the flickering light, shadows crawling along his scars. For a long while, only the fire spoke, crackling and snapping, sparks shooting upward like small birds. Breaking free, Mara's eyes caught on one ember that rose high, flared, and vanished into blackness. Her voice broke the quiet. "I feel like that," she whispered. "A bird in fire, burned but still flapping, still pretending I can fly." Elias's eyes lifted to hers, steady. "You're not pretending," he said. "You're still here." Her throat tightened. She lowered her gaze, voice trembling. "And what if my being here brings danger to you? To this place? You already carry ghosts. Elias, you don't need mine." The firelight wavered between them. Elias leaned back in his chair, staring into the flames as if they showed him something far away. "My wife," he began slowly, his voice gravel rough, "died giving birth. Fever took her before sunrise. The boy," his jaw clenched, eyes hardening against memory, "lived one day. I buried them both under that oak." Mara's breath caught. She glanced toward the window, where the silhouette of the lone oak tree swayed against starlight. Its branches clawed at the sky, roots sunk deep into soil soaked with grief. Elias's voice dropped lower. "Every morning since, I've asked myself if I buried my own heart there too. And every night, I feel like I did." Mara pressed a hand to her lips, tears stinging her eyes. The firelight caught on them, made them shine like glass. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft hiss of the burning logs, the occasional sigh of wind pressing against the walls. Finally, she let the dam break. "I'm afraid," she whispered, voice cracking. "Afraid that I'll never be more than what he made me feel. Useless, shameful, cursed. Afraid my daughters will grow thinking love is a chain, not a choice. Afraid that even here, in your silence, I am still a burden." Her tears fell then, quiet as rain on dry ground. She bowed her head, shoulders trembling. Elias rose, slow and deliberate, and crossed the small space between them. He crouched by her chair, the fire painting his face in lines of gold and shadow. He did not touch her, but his presence was close. Enough that she felt the weight of him, steady, unshakable. His voice came low, raw. I don't love skin. I love what breathes under it. Mara's breath shuddered. The words struck deeper than any embrace. She lifted her gaze, searching his eyes. In them she saw not pity, not ownership, but recognition. Pain meeting pain, fire meeting fire. Her lips parted, but no words came. Instead, she simply sat there, trembling, feeling something dangerous and holy spark alive inside her. Behind them, the girls shifted in their sleep, sighing softly, but did not wake. For the first time, their dreams were unbroken by fear. Their small faces rested easy, lit by the warmth of the hearth. Mara wiped her tears, her chest still shaking. She could not name what had begun between them, but she knew it was real. Fragile as glass, strong as iron, forbidden, yet undeniable. Outside, a hawk cut through the starlit sky, circling silently above the oak tree. It wheeled and soared, a shadow against the stars, a witness to hope rising from ash. Inside, the fire burned steady. Two souls sat close, broken but breathing, their wounds no longer separate but slowly, painfully, to bind. The sun sat merciless at its peak. No clouds to soften the sky. Noonlight spilled over the prairie like molten iron, baking the earth, pulling sweat from skin before a man even raised his hand to wipe it. The land was so still that even the hawk overhead circled slower, wings heavy in the heat. But stillness was a lie. Dust was coming. Mara felt it first, a low tremor through the earth, a dull rhythm of hooves carrying vengeance closer. Her daughters, playing near the porch, looked up at her wide-eyed as she froze. Then the sound grew louder, sharper. Elias stepped onto the porch, rifle slung loose in his hand, eyes narrowed against the glare. He had been expecting this. In truth, he had been waiting. From the south, a group of riders broke the horizon, their figures dark smudges against the fire of the sky. At their front rode the husband, face red with drink, rage dripping from him like poison. He howled curses as he drew near, spittle flying with each word. Behind him, 5 men armed and hungry for blood. Mara's breath quickened, but she stood her ground. Her daughters clutched her dress, their small fists tight as sparrows gripping twigs. The riders slowed as they reached the fence. The husband spat into the dirt. "Granger," he bellowed, "you think you can steal what's mine? Think you can shame me in my own town?" His grin was cracked and cruel. "I'll take her back, and I'll leave you in the ground with your ghosts." Elias stepped forward, down the steps, into the yard. His boots struck the dirt like a judge's gavel. He said nothing, only leveled his gaze at the man who had beaten Mara into the dust weeks ago. His silence weighed heavier than any insult. The husband snarled, "Kill him!" The men drew steel, rifles glinting under the blaze of noon. Gunfire split the silence. The yard erupted, dust exploding beneath boots, bullets whining past wood, horses screaming as they reared. Elias moved like a storm contained in flesh, his rifle booming, each shot dropping a man to the ground. Mara pulled her daughters into the cabin, slamming the door shut, but fear clawed at her chest as she heard the chaos outside. A window shattered. Mara spun, heart hammering. Her hands fell on the rifle Elias kept by the hearth. It was heavy, rough in her grasp. For a long moment she stood frozen, breath ragged, until she looked at her daughters, 3 pairs of eyes brimming with terror. Something in her broke, and something else was born. She stepped to the shattered window, propping the rifle against the sill. Her arms shook, but her eyes narrowed. She lined her shot not with skill, but with fury. When a man circled near, aiming for Elias's back, she pulled the trigger. The blast shattered the air, and the man dropped like a stone. Her daughters cried out at the sound, then quieted when they saw their mother standing tall, the smoke curling from her weapon. Outside, Elias fought on, his body a wall against the storm. Dust rose thick, choking the air, turning the battlefield into a blur of shapes and shadows. A bullet tore across his shoulder, spinning him into the dirt. Another struck near his ribs, blood spilling into his shirt. He groaned, pressing a hand to the wound, but pushed himself back to his feet. The husband roared, charging him, pistol blazing. Elias staggered, fell to one knee, but lifted his rifle, and fired. The shot missed, splintering wood. The husband laughed, cruel and wide, raising his gun for the final shot. From the porch came Mara's scream, raw, piercing, a sound that seemed to stop even the hawk in the sky. No. The cry split. The chaos cut through blood and dust. For her daughters, for herself, for the man who had bled to shield them. She screamed with every shred of strength left in her. It gave Elias one breath more, one breath to rise again. Bloodied, staggering, he pushed up from the dirt, rifle steady in hands that trembled with both rage and resolve. His eyes locked on the husband's, and in that stare was everything. Grief, fury, defiance, love. The shot cracked, final and absolute. The husband lurched backward, eyes wide, mouth spilling dust instead of curses. He toppled into the dirt he once ruled. His reign ended beneath the very sun that had watched his cruelty. The battlefield stilled. The remaining men fled, spurred by fear, by the weight of what they had seen. The prairie went quiet again, save for the labored breaths of Elias Granger. He staggered toward the oak tree, each step heavy, blood painting his path. Mara ran to him, dropping the rifle, catching his arm as he faltered. Together, they sank to the earth at the roots of the oak, the tree's shadow falling over them like a shroud. For a moment, she thought death had come for him, as it had come for his wife, his son. Tears streaked her cheeks as she pressed her hands to his wounds, whispering his name like a prayer. But Elias breathed still, faint, ragged, but alive. He met her gaze with eyes dulled by pain, yet burning with something more. Redemption. She held him there, beneath the tree that had once marked only death. And in her arms, that ground no longer felt like a grave. Days passed. The bodies were buried far from the ranch, the dust reclaiming what it was owed. Life, slow and quiet, returned to the cabin. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Elias stood in the yard, his arm bound, his strength returning in hard breaths. The girls clustered around him, giggling as he lifted them onto a mare's back one by one, teaching their small hands how to grip reins, how to sit tall. Mara stood on the porch, watching, her heart heavy yet light all at once. She was no longer. The woman crumpled in the dirt. She was whole, if scarred, strong, if shaken, and she was not alone. The oak tree swayed in the wind behind them, branches whispering against the dying light. Once it had stood as a grave, but now it loomed as something else, proof that roots could hold both grief and hope. Legacy, not loneliness, had taken root in the ranch, and as the hawk wheeled above, silent in the fading sky, the land seemed at last to breathe in peace.